Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the LGFP latest in our webinar series. Today, we'll be talking about service level budgeting, the path we need to take to ensure sustainability. So for the next hour or so, you'll be graced by myself and Tony Brett presence. I'm Michael Shave, the president of the LGFP Queensland, and Tony is the immediate past president of the LGFP. So thanks, Tony, for your time.
Morning.
Look, before we start, everyone, we'll just do an acknowledgement of country. So I recognise that we are hosting this webinar from the country of the Kabi people. I also recognise the traditional owners of the countries where you all work today and the First Nations people present in this webinar. I pay my respects to all elders past and present and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and their cultures and connections to the land and waters of Queensland. Okay, today we're going to be talking about service level budgeting and probably wrap that around the discussion around service planning. And so we'll go through a number of topics today, and myself and Tony are going to have a bit of a chat. I'll be asking Tony a few questions under each one of these topics. So firstly, what is service planning itself in terms of the context? Why are we talking about service planning and service level budgeting today? We want to have a brief chat about how we develop service plans, or what's the approach that councils are taking, given it's a bit of an emerging field for local government. Then we want to get more into the financial aspects, so incorporating service planning into the budget process. What's the role of finance professionals, more importantly? So for the finance professionals on the webinar today, we'll be talking about your role and what you can do. We want to then briefly talk about, well, how can it help councils for monitoring their performance? So what's the benefits of having those service plans in place? And then we'll sort of wrap up the discussion today around future trends. And more importantly, everyone, you'll see at the bottom of your screen, there's a toolbar and there's a live Q&A button there. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation today, we will cover them off at the end of the session. So we'll probably leave about 10 or 15 minutes at the end of today's session to talk through questions. So yeah, feel free to send them through. So just today, we'll just do a bit of an introduction. So why are we talking about service level budgeting? So just a bit of context, in Queensland, the latest Auditor General's report that was presented to Parliament for 2023, they identified that about 48 councils out of the 77, about 62%, are considered as either at moderate or high risk of not being sustainable. So significant number. We've seen at the moment as well, there's a number of federal and state inquiries into local government financial sustainability. So the federal government currently is looking into the issue. I think submissions closed last week. The New South Wales and Victorian governments are also looking at financial sustainability of local government at the moment. Queensland, as we probably are aware, have undergone a lot of work in the last couple of years looking at sustainability. They've released a new framework for local government. They've released a new guideline with new measures to assess performance. So look, there's a lot happening in that space, and we probably all know as finance professionals that sustainability is it's an ongoing challenge for us all, and it's under the context of those constant economic challenges that we're seeing out there, particularly in the last few years: inflation, cost increases, supply chain pressures, and now we're starting to see the funding aspects. So we saw quite a stimulus of funding over the last few years. That's now starting to drop off, which is going to create more pressure on local government. Not only that, we're seeing increasing levels of compliance, not around sort of standards in terms of assets, but also, health, safety, and other things that councils have to comply with, and the general one around expectations of the community. So people are expecting councils to do more. So how do we manage that in the context of remaining sustainable, having enough money in the bank, keeping everyone happy? So a bit of background there. But look, I'll get Tony to do a bit of talking now. So Tony, I want to talk about service plans or service catalogues. So that's the new thinking in local government that's sort of happening over the last few years. So in your experience, can you just explain for our audience what service planning is?
Yeah, so I guess coming back to some of those points that you've raised in sort of the background around where this is all sort of coming from, I think at the end of the day, a service plan is really about communicating to the public, councillors, and also to staff. So it really sort of ticks that box off in terms of, understanding what councils do, how well they do it, what it costs, what resources are involved. There's a whole range of different things that you can include in a service plan, and different levels of detail for different circumstances and potentially for different services. So fundamentally, I guess it's where you go through a process of reviewing everything that the council does to understand first and foremost what different activities there are, and try and group those up into, I guess, things that sort of make sense more to probably the public and outsiders than necessarily the council structure, although that is, a valid way of doing it. But you may find that there's some areas that have overlap and go across different services. So you want to make sure you can capture that. But really, identifying what the services are, and getting a bit of a list of those together, and then starting to think about, what are the actual levels of those services? So, how often do you do something? What are the opening hours of council facilities? How often do parks get mowed are really common examples. And then starting to then add into that what the costs of those services are, and starting to understand, for a given value, what do we actually get for that money in terms of outputs. And then I guess to take it a further step is then to start to look at your performance targets and starting to monitor those targets. If making a commitment to the community about providing certain levels of service, how well you're actually going against that. The idea, of course, is then to wrap that up into some sort of document. And there's examples out there from various different councils around the place. And it's just putting it together and then, making it public. And some councils choose to publish the whole thing. Some will, only publish potentially the more forward-facing aspects of it. So they might have internal services that, just sort of sit behind the scenes. And they may also publish just a bit of a summary rather than some of the full documentation. So really, I guess it's
something that
an
the customer
opportunity,
or the community member would want to see, rather than the whole box and dice of what council provides. Yeah.
Sorry.
That's all right. So can you hear me, Tony?
No.
All right. So
look, you're back.
We got him back. So Tony, sort your technical issues out, please. But look, Tony, in terms of that process, councils are delivering services now. They have been for 100 years. So they wouldn't be starting from scratch, would they, in terms of if they wanted to start thinking about service planning? I'm sure there's stuff already in place to keep it really simple.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's one of the, I guess, the fears of potentially councils, sort of holding back on this is like, it's going to be a lot of work to pull this together. And it is a fair bit of work, but you're right. A lot of that information is probably already available in some form or another. Thinking about assets, or particularly say water and sewerage, there's already certain standards that you will be complying with or propose to comply with. There'll be information in asset management plans around service levels that give a good starting point, and potentially their technical levels of service and may not be too meaningful to the consumer, but they're a good opportunity to start thinking about it. Other opportunities are, talking to staff. They know what, the staff know what they do and how often things get done. So, they're obviously, working to a plan or to an expected level. So it's really just sort of getting in and documenting that, and then combining that into a consolidated way, because these documents might be scattered across. You see examples of councils with a customer service charter that talks about responsiveness to inquiries, or when the office hours and those sorts of things. Asset management plans have that. Other different departments or different sections might have their own little work plans that they have internally. So there's a whole range of different bits and pieces, and it's a matter of sitting down and starting to think about where you might be able to find that information and start pulling it together. And yeah, there's a lot of information that if you sit down and interview staff, they'll be able to tell you, what's going on and how they do things. So I guess it's there, but yeah, often you'll find it's scattered across a whole range of different documents, information, corporate plans or operational plans, asset management plans. Yeah.
So it's more, there is a lot of information within the local government or council. The service catalogue philosophy is more of bringing it sort of up to almost a bit of a higher level that's easily consumed, particularly by councillors and community, and then having your core services, your activities and your service levels, and then being able to then potentially start tying in resources. And that's what we want to talk about today around the service level budgeting side of things. So, and look, that's, and what you're saying is there might be a necessary level of duplication there, because an officer in water and sewerage who's using an asset management plan, that's the level of detail they need to run their operations. However, there's still, for the community, a potential level in terms of what services that water and sewerage provide to the community that could be duplicated, but a bit more in a simple manner, if that makes sense. So
yeah, and it could be a simple thing like the technical level of service has a particular, for water, there's a particular quality level that makes it drinkable that you've got to be sort of working towards. But from a community point of view, what are they looking at? What the level of pH or whatever in the water might be. No, they're looking at, is the water drinkable? If I turn the tap on, does it come out? So that's some of the key things that, what's the reliability, or, what's the responsiveness to a break? If the water main breaks, how, what's the level of service to get that fixed and get the water back and running again?
Yep.
So yeah, whilst there may be technical levels in there, you're right. Pulling it together from a service planning point of view would be to extract out just that information that the public want. And it's not to say then that you don't pay attention, obviously, to your asset management plans and the technical levels of service, because they're still, significantly important. But it's just one of those things where, the community is looking at it from a slightly different perspective than the officers on the ground.
And look, we're going to talk a fair bit today about sustainability and obviously the cost of services, but why, if councils are going down this path, why do you think a service catalogue or the individual plans would be an important tool for councils to help manage their financial sustainability?
Yeah, I think the key point there is, what is council actually delivering it to the community, and getting a really good understanding of everything that a council does. There's lots of things that councils do. Getting it to understand what that is a really good start, because then you can start to think about things like, why do we do it? What's the basis of providing that particular service? You can then start to ask questions about, should we be continuing that service or at that level, or do it all together? If you're providing, it might be that you've got some small enterprise or, say a caravan park or something that's losing money, so being subsidised by the ratepayers. Is that something council should be involved in if there's competition in the market? If there's only the one van park in town, then perhaps as part of a tourism or economic development initiative, it's fair enough. But the questions, can then be asked if it's documented and people are understanding what's actually going on. The other part about it, of course, is then the levels of service. So having an understanding of what those levels of service are, you can really start to consider, is that sustainable in the long term? We all know the community will want, as best as level of service as it can get, but not necessarily be willing to pay for that level of service. So sometimes there's, a potential mismatch between what council can afford and what the community wants. So understanding what that difference is can really help with that sustainability. The other points, I guess, is then introducing new services. If you've got a bit of a service sort of planning mentality or philosophy in your council, bringing in new services, you can run it through a service planning sort of lens to understand, what are the impacts of upgrading or increasing levels of service or bringing in a new service altogether, and really starting to think about, what's the whole cost of this activity, in terms of, resourcing for staffing or equipment or money or, all of those different aspects of it. What are we expected to get out of it? What's going to be the benefits to the community versus obviously the cost, and how is that going to be funded? So I think that's from a sustainability point of view, that can be really valuable in understanding, what happens if we change things up or what happens if we bring something new in.
And if we talk about the budget decision-making process, one of the challenges has always been, in my experience, is that the councillors who are the decision makers often don't see the how the operating budget's built. So potentially this is a different way to frame how that budget's developed, and we're going to talk about that a bit more later. But from a councillor perspective, Tony, I'm sure it would provide a bit more transparency. So councillors, if they're making decisions on where funds are allocated, because it's all about, scarce resources being prioritised, and there's competing, councils have multiple different businesses are all competing for that scarce dollar. It's probably going to help council make some of those better strategic decisions around, where do the dollars go, i.e. let's keep delivering what we're doing. Are we doing everything as well as we could be? Are we actually meeting what we're saying we're going to deliver if we have our service levels in place and our performance measures, which again, we'll talk about a bit later. But even councillors understanding the cost of a service, and then does that then trigger a way to, have different budget conversations, particularly as we know when there isn't any money, or councillors aren't keen on a rate increase for those councils that have rateable properties. It's like, then, well, what are the trade-offs? And that potentially will expose councillors to those harder decisions, and maybe help them empower them to make those decisions and own those decisions. Is that something that's feasible?
Yeah, and I think from that point of view of getting the councillors to understand it in, I guess, more reasonable terms than just looking at dollars on a page, because, you've been in budget workshops, I'm sure everybody has, where, you put up the old traditional, PowerPoint presentation with a spreadsheet table that you've cut and pasted out of Excel, and it's got, last year's actuals, the proposed budget, a percentage difference, and some commentary. And it's kind of hard to gauge what that impact might actually mean, particularly when you're, looking at making a cut or, recommending a change, or where you have an idea that's come from an elected member to say, well, we want to construct, another 15 barbecues in some of these parks. Well, if you know what a servicing of a barbecue costs you, you can then actually sort of explain to them, well, this is what the level of service currently is. This is what it will then look like. And in terms of costing, it's a bit more realistic in terms of demonstrating to them that incremental effect. And I think it's also good too for staff to understand then that, if you're going to look for additional funding, well, what's the impact on the services? If we're getting a lot of complaints because we're not meeting the current levels of service, well, then you've got an opportunity to, potentially provide more resources if that's the appropriate level of service, or change the service level. And that's something that, from a councillor point of view, they're going to need to understand what the impacts might be, or why. If there's an expectation, but you're not funded to provide that level, there's only so many people you've got available. Yeah.
We're probably not going to go down today about talking about service reviews, but obviously that would be another component once you do have your service catalogues in place. And as Tony mentioned, you do identify some areas that may be underperforming, which we all have, and that's just the reality of service delivery. Then, does it trigger a review of the service, as Tony mentioned, and is it under resourced? Is it just inefficient? Is there obviously potentially a number of different elements at play that then can be investigated and potentially, you know, addressed through that service planning process. So, but Tony, probably also the organisation, and you know, we're always looking at organisations, sort of how can we do things better. So, do you think that, you know, having some sort of structure in place around the services you provide, particularly in the individual areas, so they effectively, it's a little mini business plan as such, isn't it? If you're identifying your service activities, your services, your service levels, and potentially even your performance measures. So what are we actually trying to achieve here? Like, what are we being funded to deliver? And then what's our targets? That's got to be beneficial for those managers, hasn't it? Surely.
Yeah, and I think that's the ultimate aim of of getting a service plan or service catalog together, is to start to get that reporting against the outcomes and that level of accountability. So I think, yeah, from an accountability point of view, it can definitely help set some of those targets, in that, you know what you've sort of been resourced for. Hopefully the targets are, sort of achievable and, and reasonable given the level of resourcing. But if you're then not meeting those targets, you've then got opportunities to have that conversation about, well, what's going on? If there's a certain level of service expected around, say, responses to animal attacks, but you don't have enough officers, field officers to deal with the level of inquiries or the level of issues, then you've got an opportunity to explain what's going on and how that might work. And the other thing too, I think, that can help not just staff but also councillors, is having those conversations with the public, is getting them to understand what those levels are, and getting that information out there, and trying to provide that at a point in time that the community can understand what they can expect. You can be very upfront about it, in terms of what people can expect in terms of, potentially a turnaround time for inquiries or applications, and those sorts of things that the community might want, or might be things like mowing of a park. You can sort of explain what the process is that council's gone through to determine that level of service, and whilst they might not agree with it, it's something that is, it's linked to a budget, it's linked to funding, it's linked to the resourcing of the organisation to provide it. So I think it can provide that conversation piece, but also from a staff point of view, it can provide a bit more clarity around what's expected, particularly when it's been put through a process where the council have agreed to it. Staff then have a bit more certainty around what they're kind of expected, and particularly in those community facing areas where the idea is, you get this idea that I've got to respond to the inquiry as quickly as possible. Well, if you're not resourced to do that straight away, and there's a 5-day turnaround time on something, well, that's the level of service that people can then expect. So to improve that turnaround time, obviously more resourcing is required. So it gives that opportunity to look at that.
But the Tony, I think takeaways there is it can potentially streamline efficiencies around communication. So your customer service team might be able to head off calls instead of going, oh, well, I need to put you through to the parks manager because he knows I don't know about mowing service levels and when Park X is getting mowed next. But potentially, if there's a service level around a particular type of park, it could be a local park or a district park, then that can be communicated up front. It could even help councillors in terms of communicating on the ground with their communities and help them manage expectations. So managing that community expectation. But we're going to segue into what's in a service plan. What are some of the key components now? But obviously that you said staff understanding where they fit. And that's probably for someone coming into an organisation, if being able to give them a little saying, here's what we do on a page, then it can be valuable, can't it? Because then they understand, well, what we do, what levels we provide, and then what targets we potentially have to hit. So that can be valuable as well. But let's go into maybe talking quickly about a service plan or a service catalogue. Is it a big project? Like how can councils, start that thinking? And whilst councils we know it's getting a bit of traction out there, but how, is it a bit overwhelming? It sounds like a big job.
It definitely can be a big job, and I think it's important for people to understand that it's a process that you want to sort of work on over a period of time. If unless you really want to resource up and get in and get it done, it's not something that you can sort of do in your spare time while doing your normal day job. I think it's definitely a discrete project, but the level of complexity will depend on I guess the council's appetite for how much time and effort they want to put into it. Certainly, getting started, you could sort of start to get a list of services together. Even if you start looking at your budgeting structures, or some of your work orders and those sorts of things. Like I said, it's not necessarily aligned to an organizational structure, but you get a pretty good feel for what goes on. And I think defining, upfront,
So what you're doing, like what are our services, and what
get a list together first and
sounds
foremost,
like a
and
good
then
start. And we're looking at some of the plans out there, Tony. You're not talking hundreds, are you? Like you're talking, they seem to be a bit higher level. The service, like the definition of a service. So like libraries would be a service rather than, library maintenance or library programs, or library lending. So that's probably where you'd start, probably a bit higher level.
and at a higher level that kind of makes sense. And that'll also depend on the size of the council as well. And how many different things
You
that
do.
goes on in each council, because you're right, it is a bit of a higher level, and that's often a bit of a sticking point in trying to implement these things, in times of trying to work out what's a service, what's a subservice, what's an activity. Is roads transport a service? Is it sealed roads? Is it unsealed roads? There's a heap of different ways of divvying things up, but I think understanding, getting the list together, and then starting to break that down, or roll it up into the appropriate lists of service. And then you can even start to think about, what's our more important services? Where do we want to spend the time and effort pulling this together? So you can then prioritize your services that you want to sort of delve into, rather than trying to do everything all at once. And I think it's a bit like reviewing your fees and charges. You can spend a lot of time reviewing every single fee and charge, but there's only probably 5 or 6 that make the most contribution. So it's a bit like service levels, service plans. Get started with the big ones first, and then you can work your way through in a sort of a staged process. But certainly just getting a list together, and understanding that the first couple of rounds, the first couple of cuts that you do of this is not going to be perfect. And I think there's a lot of things that councils do, or they put off doing, because they want to get the perfect data. It's a bit like asset management, 10 years ago, where a lot of councils didn't, we've got to get the data right before we start. Well, no, you just start, get the list together, and then work on it from there. So, once you've got your list and identified, what the approach is going to be, then it's a matter of working through those particular sections, starting to bring in more detail. So starting to think about, what is our activities? What are our service levels for those activities? How does it link to our corporate plan? What's the basis of the service? Is it a statutory requirement we have to provide? Is it a legacy issue that, we've, just picked up from somewhere? All of those sorts of little bits and pieces to start to drill in on particular services. And bringing your budget stuff together is relatively easy for most of the services. Obviously, where things cross over, it can get a bit tricky in terms of, how do you then decide to split it up? But again, it's going to be one of those things that, to get started, near enough, I personally think near enough's often good enough to get things rolling. And then you can start to refine it. And, like I said, think about the end game and not get too bogged down in the details.
So as a start, you could just define your service, and this is where I'm going to start to bring in the sessions about service level budgeting, and our members are finance professionals, as we know. But it's then linking those budgets, isn't it? And potentially, how do then the finance professionals play a role in that? I'm assuming a big one, because they know the ledger, they know the cost centers, they know the budget structures. So they would have to play a key role in this, an exercise of costing services, wouldn't they?
Yeah, and definitely finance needs to be involved. And also, helping that process can also then help the service delivery manager or whoever's developing their plan to probably better understand their budget as well. And we're not talking just about budget. We're not talking just about dollars. We're also talking about FTEs. It might be equipment or
Assets.
facilities,
Yep.
assets, fleet, all of those sorts of things. So again, that level of detail, is something to be decided on in terms of how you want to sort of approach that in the service plan. And you know, providing services that are asset intensive, it can probably just get a good understanding of what the major assets might be. You don't necessarily need to list absolutely everything, but it can give a bit of a flavor for that. Full-time equivalent staffing, I think, is really important in terms of understanding, because so many of this stuff is, obviously people driven. So yeah, understanding what that looks like. But yeah, the finance team needs to be involved from the start, and starting to have those, and particularly where you get crossed over sort of services that might use a couple of different functions, or where you've got it might be a cost center that's sort of split into a couple of different ways. Definitely helping sort of work through that in whatever's a reasonable basis. I think is a
And
really good opportunity.
yeah, and once councils start to get a little bit more mature and start to think then about the service levels and particularly measures, performance measures, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But that's where potentially there could be a rethink of how general ledgers are structured. Do we start to have separate ledger structures based on services and service levels and organisational structure? So there's different ways to skin a cat in terms of presenting information to particularly the councillors as part of a budget process, which we're going to
Yeah,
talk about shortly.
yeah, and that is a good opportunity for finance, and depending again on the software system. But I think most modern systems would allow you to have an alternative structure that you can then link budgets to services. And again, to a certain extent, some of it's going to be a little bit arbitrary, but I think again on a reasonable basis, it's going to be near enough to give the information that we're trying to convey, and it can be quite an interesting exercise to run the report, based on services, and you sort of very quickly see where most of the money is being spent, and those
Yep.
sort of heat map type graphics can be quite useful in that. But
Yep.
yeah, it's definitely an opportunity to look at that ledger structure. And we're not saying move totally away from a traditional sort of ledger, because that's just easy, to sort of work with, but have an alternative structure that you can use to pull that information out.
And we're going to segue now, Tony, into how we can start thinking about a service planning philosophy as we go through a budget process. So, budget process, in my opinion, the biggest project of the year for a council. It usually runs about 6 months, doesn't it? Probably longer for some councils, multiple workshops and a lot of work involved by the whole organisation pulling together a budget each year. So from your view, Tony, how do you think it would be a little bit different if we think about a service planning, a budgeting approach versus a traditional budgeting approaches that we're familiar with?
Yeah, in my opinion, this would be a much better way of budgeting. Thinking about councils, and you think about the amount of money that's spent on providing the day-to-day sort of services, that's where the majority of it is. If things don't necessarily change from year to year, then there's not a lot of real need to sort of spend too much time on delving too deep into your budgets, unless of course you're specifically trying to make some savings or there's some particular issues. But having a service planning approach can sort of enable the councillors to sort of work out, and the staff work out, for this level of funding, this is what we get. If they're happy with that level of service, well, then the funding will just have to flow from that. If they want to reduce the budget, then you can then say, well, this was what we'll do to the service. So you're
It's
really
almost
starting to,
flipping
yeah,
the process. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, you're thinking about the outcome rather than the input. And I experienced this previously working with the Department of Defence, where with the Army we had budget cuts of 50% in terms of our sort of admin operating type budgets. And the cuts were on the basis of, well, tell us what you're currently doing. We'll decide if that's the right level of output, and we'll then set the money to match. And so we were able to sort of get to that point where we got to the point where we said, well, we can no longer deliver the service level you're after with the amount of funding that you've got. And so, it really forced us to sort of consider the output of how we were achieving some of the goals we were doing. But it then also provided the feedback to the decision makers to say, well, if you do that cut, we can't deliver. And so, there's that sort of process that you can go through. The idea of starting with the end in mind, I think, will really sort of speed things up and enable councils to focus on, instead of going through and deciding, how much are we going to spend on tea and coffee this year, or, where the advertising budget's going, actually look at the outcomes and the services and say, well, the library's open this many hours a day, this many days a week. What's the with the utilization of that? Do we need to look at shutting at lunchtime on a Saturday instead of spending, having the whole day open? Yep. Do we do some surveys and find out with the community? You're actually then starting to sort of influence more about what council does than what it sort of spends. So,
it's going to inform that community engagement potentially. It's going to definitely help councillors start to take ownership of decisions, because at the moment, my experience in the history of local government budgeting, it's been sometimes just put in a efficiency dividend in the budget, but what that really does is just stop service delivery happening, because managers quite rightly stop doing things because that's probably their only avenue of saving money, and that then impacts on the service delivery, and the councillor gets a phone call and then asks why, what's going on, and say, well, I'm meeting my target, councillor, so thank you very much. But we talked about flipping the process, Tony. We talked about potentially, developing our BAU. So what's the current level of service we're providing? Budgeting, preparing a budget based on that. But also, do you think it would then allow, a bit of transparency about what changes? So the budgets are developed on, this is what we're currently doing. And there's, you can have a separate process for changes in service levels, new services, changes in service levels due to whatever reason, regulatory requirements, strategic plan implementations, and so on. And then there's separate decision making around that. So what do we need to, collect in revenue to fund what we're doing versus, all right, well, how are we going to then, if we want change, and we all do, we want to provide better services, how do we fund that? Do you think that might provide a bit more transparency and ownership in the budget process?
Yeah, and I think, again, you're looking at the outcome in mind. So what are we trying to achieve? And you touched on efficiency dividends before. Well, applying a blanket efficiency dividend across all departments, it's simple, it's easy, it's quick, but it doesn't actually result in any long-term sort of change. And so that's where it's important to think about, how does that impact on services? What are our services that, we can sort of focus that potentially we're over-servicing and make some cuts there. In terms of new services, it's definitely an excellent opportunity or changing in service level to sort of say, well, if you now want us to do, open space litter collection 3 times a week instead of once a week, well, then we can then fairly reasonably calculate, and, in terms of additional labour costs, time and effort, and therefore a dollar value on what that looks like, or potentially an impact on other services in that, if you're utilising the same staff, well, we might have to pull them away from another spot in order to do that service. So it creates a different conversation that's not just about the dollars, because I think too often you're right, you see cuts or changes made that then get reversed, a couple of months later based on community feedback and community complaints. We've made some changes here, the community's not happy, we better fix it, better reverse it. So thinking about that in the first place, and then, being a bit braver and actually going out to the community with some of these things, having a service planning sort of approach to it makes that conversation a little bit easier with the community, particularly when you're talking about particular issues or, focus items. And again, it's that up to council whether or not you would go out on everything or just particular things. but it does give you the opportunity to really focus in on, and quantify impacts and changes. If your community suddenly decides they want open, like a hard rubbish cleanup, like the council next door, you can then look at that from a level of service and attach a cost to that, and then say, okay, well, this is where we need to go with our rating. It's an extra 1% or whatever.
And it is, I suppose, it's not this isn't all theoretical, because in my experience, there's been where we've had a service catalogue in place, it has driven strategic decisions by council. An example, street sweeping, we needed to save some money. Council had flexibility in the contract to reduce the street sweeping service levels. However, they went back up the next year because there was complaints by the community. It was a valued service, but the next year there was available funding, so things change. But it was, it wasn't just save money. It was actually, no, we're going to actually reduce that level of service. The budget manager was comfortable because it was a council decision. The contractor was notified. So there's examples of it working, because a number of councils are starting to adopt that approach. So, but probably
and
quickly,
I've seen that too with animal complaints. The community were complaining. There's a lot of animal complaints. The council was saying, well, why are these taking 6 weeks to sort out? The answer was, well, we're not resourced for that level of service, and so we're able to obtain 2 extra officers, a couple of extra vehicles on a like a 12-month short-term trial, and then was able to demonstrate that was actually the level of resourcing to maintain that level of service. So then that was then incorporated into future budgets. So it's not always about cuts, but it's also about focusing on that outcome of what are we trying to achieve, and is it realistic with the resourcing that we've got.
And I think for finance professionals, not only does it help them, because then there's there is science behind the numbers, and it's not the finance manager's role to potentially find the savings. It puts the decision making in the hands of those who are responsible, which is usually your executive and your elected members. So I think it's great if if they can make decisions based on level of service, and even services themselves. Do they know what their important services are there, what services they might be providing that are optional? And then is that a way to then work out well, what actually do we test with our community in terms of what's their appetite to maybe not have a level of service if it's means that they don't have to pay as much in their rates as they might have to. So all right, so Tony, that's good discussion. Now, just in the role of finance professionals, so we've sort of been running on a theme over the last couple of years with finance professionals, particularly in Queensland with the LGFP. We're not just bean counters anymore, as much as we would like to be. We're more finance partners, and it's partnering with organisations to get better outcomes. So probably no different here. If we start thinking about service planning, how can they start to morph from a accounting professional into a strategic finance partner for the organisation? What are some of the key things you think that we need to think about?
Well, it's definitely getting in and understanding what the business actually does. So it's not just about the numbers. The numbers is the easy bit. It's if you're going to be a good business partner, you need to really understand what the different sections do, and I think being involved in that process and understanding that can then help, particularly when they have questions or issues about changing of service levels, but also just analysing the performance. You might see a budget, you might be over budget, might be that question around, well, what's going on there? Has overtime gone up because, we're having to respond to more things? So then you can then start to sort of think about, well, what's changed, what's different, what could we do about that? Is it a resourcing issue? Is it a one-off? There's a whole lot of different analytics that you can then have a look at in terms of, how do you still achieve that outcome? The other thing, I think, it gives you an opportunity to get out and talk to different departments and different staff. If you're a bit more involved in getting out of the finance office, then obviously your partnership is going to be, much more valuable and much better. And I think that's a good opportunity for finance people to get out and start talking about, what's going on, how things are traveling, and moving beyond those numbers. So I think that really does improve that understanding, because finance is one of those few parts of council where you work across everything. So it's an opportunity really to break down those silos, and start to identify, you can look to identify potentially opportunities for different, I guess, synergies between sections or departments. It might be, in terms of, upskilling the customer service team to take on more of those inquiries, because now you've got a document that you can use to provide feedback to customers at the first point of call. How do you then start to translate that into your budgeting? Community consultation can make it a bit easier. So there's a whole lot of stuff that you can get involved in from a finance point of view that's not just about the numbers, and it just broadens that skills. And obviously getting those understandings in terms of future career development is really important, so that when you're sitting around the budget table and you're talking about this sort of stuff, you do have a really good understanding of actually what's going on.
So you can support the business as well, or the area that potentially, because you've got an understanding, if you're involved in potentially even helping set budgets based on service levels and services, then, it might even help the finance professional with end of month reporting, particularly with variance reporting. The waste business has 3 concrete crushers budgeted. That's its level of service this year. We've only done 1. We're underspent. Councillor or Madam Mayor, that's the reason. It's all good. So it probably would help, with, understanding the business, helps finance professionals get that broader skill set across different areas, depending, of course, on the size of council.
And also can help the managers when they're starting to put their bids together. If they want more staff, well, what's the outcome? Too often you'll just see budget time comes up, there's a mad flurry of extra staff bids that come through. We're just under resourced. But how do you actually articulate that? Because I think a lot of those bids might get knocked back by the exec initially, or potentially, by the council if it gets that far, because of that lack of detail. And maybe there is there's a really good reason why they need that extra staffing. And if it's outputs and service level related, there is really an opportunity to help articulate that, it's not just we're under-resourced. We're actually under-resourced and we're underperforming to the service standard that we've set, because, and then obviously you then can sort of capture the dollar signs as well, and link the two together.
So potentially you're talking about councils that have maturity in this space can potentially start reporting on their service performance through measures. So, have we answered the phone within the minute that we said we would in our service catalogue? And then would that then help drive decision making and questioning, whether that's through maybe quarterly operational plan updates, or through your annual report? You might be have across a selection of your important community service performance measures, and so on. So look, I think reporting is probably the benefits of going down a service planning approach, but also I think that's currently going to be the challenge for councils, is having the systems and tools in place to be able to do that. So,
but also with that feedback from the community too, like if the community, constantly complaining about a particular level of service, you can then start to drill into that and understand, is it a perception issue? Is it a real issue? Have we promised too much, or are we not delivering? That it sort of can help validate, because the management, might be saying, well, yes, we're achieving all our goals, we're meeting the targets, but the councils are still getting the complaints. So that's a conversation about then the level of service. If the community is expecting something different compared to what they're actually receiving, then there's a conversation you can then have about, well, do you say, well, that's the level of service and that's the way it is, or okay, the community want it, maybe we need to improve it?
I still think having that, councillor having on their phone their service levels would be, great. They can deal with Joe on the street or Mary, and head off some of that noise that we get when there's requests put through and why are we not doing this and that, and a bit of transparency. But we're running out of time, Tony. Just a reminder, everyone, there's the Q&A button. Had not too many questions coming through, but that's fine. We must be doing well. Tony, probably just quickly, future trends. What do you think? Where do you think things might head on with the development of service planning? It's sort of in its infancy almost, isn't it, with local government? Commercial sectors, it's all profit driven. They know their service levels and their performance measures, and they work, they're quite mature. But local government in particular, state government has their service standards, of course. Local government, it's morphing as a future sustainability tool. What do you think is going to happen, future trends over the next 10 years?
Yeah, I think it will grow. I think it'll be a bit like asset management planning. If you go back probably 15 years, as a few councils are doing it, then, it started to become, I guess, a bit more popular. And then, of course, I don't know if it'll, turn into some sort of legislative requirement. But, if you think about from a community consultation point of view, there's a requirement to undertake meaningful consultation. But it's not ever been defined. So I think this is a really good opportunity for councils to do a bit better in that space. I remember I first did service planning, it must have been in 2005 or 6 in Darwin, in the Northern Territory, and sort of done some various iterations and different organisations along the way. But it hasn't really sort of gained, and I think it's part of that fear that we're not doing it right. It's too hard, and I think we've got to get over that first. I think we've got to say, well, we know what we're doing, whether it's right or wrong, it's what we do. So let's actually get it down, start to think about whether it's right or wrong later, and that's that engagement piece. Just start, because whatever you're doing now, you're providing services. And I think over the next little while, we'll sort of see more councils doing it. And I think as the benefits become apparent, I think then other councils will probably want to get involved. And it doesn't have to be a big council thing. I think little councils, smaller councils, rural remote councils can do this just as well, and really start to understand. And for them, it's an opportunity, I think, to then lobby government and other service providers around, well, if we're providing a QGAP service and it's costing us $20,000 of council money, how about you top us up if you want us to continue to provide QGAP, which is a valuable community service. But if they're not resourcing it to the level of service the community needs, that's a real opportunity, I think, particularly for those, to actually document something that's real rather than just, the constant, we just want some more money. It fills in that gap. We want some more money because, and this is what the outcome will be. Yeah.
It's interesting. And look, we've probably all seen it over the last couple of years. Technology is just going ahead in leaps and bounds. So I'm sure that there'll be particularly data collection and reporting. That's probably one of the areas we'll probably see, leaps and bounds in terms of tools and AI and all that type of thing to start being able to pull this information in and start to report on your actual performance. So I think that's going to be another opportunity for councils, is using that technology to better help you with this service planning approach, if that's the path you want to take. So thanks, Tony. But we got a couple of questions. We have one question from the audience. What are some examples of how to allocate back of house functions to the various services you have discussed today? It's probably, are we talking corporate functions, or are we talking here probably, because, I think from my perspective, answering that question, well, your individual business areas they know what they're doing. If we're talking about support, then, usually your finance team, if we're talking finance, you've got your hopefully management accounting side of things where, they're helping with the budgets. And this is probably, from me, that's probably where it sits, with some support maybe from the financial accounting team.
Yeah, and I think with this, if we're talking about sort of support functions, the IT, the HR, the sort of corporate overhead type sort of thing, from a resource point of view, I think when you're looking at your budgets, that would be an item just to consider. But those back of house functions also would have their own internal service catalog. So it's, how often, what's the turnaround time frame on recruitment from HR? We're expecting,
Procurement. Yep.
or procurement. Yeah. How, what's the responsiveness to that, in terms of, from a
Tender
finance
request.
team point of view,
Yep.
when do we, if we're having a monthly meeting or a monthly report, or, what hierarchy of reporting. So you would have a service catalog, I guess, that would also include your internal services with their costs, but then those costs would be, if you're doing an overhead allocation process, would then be allocated out to the delivery services as well. So from a budgeting point of view, you would have to then be sort of careful how you add it up if you're looking at a consolidated sort of figure. But you definitely want to articulate what your internal services are. And that can be a bit more difficult, in terms of, what's the records, they might be looking at retrieval of documents, or, putting, archiving, those sorts of things.
Yeah,
it's a bit hard
archiving requirements.
Yeah. So sometimes they're a bit hard, but I think it's definitely worth having a look at.
But and apologies, I might have misinterpreted that question. Yeah, but I think, definitely, as Tony mentioned earlier, you can define your internal services as well. It's just potentially what you want to display to the community in your catalog. You can have maybe a catalog for internal purposes and a catalog that maybe shows just what's important to the community and the councillors from that point of view. So thanks, Tony. Second question, would you recommend aligning service types or names with ABS descriptions for consistency of reporting? Sounds fair enough. No?
No. I think you need to have your services named in a way that's meaningful to the community and the elected members and the staff. Some of those ABS names, I guess I'm sort of thinking along the lines of, from a financial statement point of view, the function note, I would have those aligned to ABS because it's easy for the Grants Commission return, but that's just me. But I think from a service catalogue or service planning point of view, you'd probably want to stick to a naming, because we're not, I guess the outcome of this is not necessarily to compare services across councils or organisations, and I hope it doesn't turn into that, because it's got to be relevant for the community that it's serving. So I would think, whatever's a meaningful description for the community that it's reporting to.
Couple of quick more questions, Tony, and then we'll have to wrap things up. So what is the role of finance when activities set conflicting service levels? Probably pointed out. Or maybe is it possibly here we could be talking about customer service responsiveness, something like that, where one area might say we're going to do it in 2 days and another says, well, in 5. Is that sort of something where you'd probably need to point that out to the relevant areas, or is there a specific reason for that?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of that mediator, conversation starter type. What's the implications for both, and how does that impact on the whole? Trying to understand why this section wants that level and this section wants that level. So I think, it would be sort of that. The decision will be made outside of finance, obviously, but I think it's that opportunity to sort of say, well, let's actually have a think about what this might mean.
And that might actually happen when you first go through the exercise. You might find conflicts in terms of levels of service across different departments and so on. So just one or two more quick ones, Tony. To get started, what are the main benefits to get buy-in from management and council?
I think it's that understanding of what council does and why, and what the services are actually being delivered. It's really about trying to get that point of view that you can understand, for this given level of resources, this is what's coming out. And I think at the moment, there's lots of stuff that happens in councils, and it's all, really valuable and important in some respects. But then there's also a lot of other things that I think councils do that, you know, why do we do it at that level, or you know, how can we do things better? So I think it's initially understanding the breadth of everything that goes on, and then starting to look at those opportunities for improvement. You know, what are the hot spots? You know, where can we go with it? So,
and look,
I think it simplifies the budgeting process too. If you get
and the
to
reality is management and council have to be invested. Of course, I think finance professionals can encourage, but ultimately it's management that needs to invest the effort in, and council, to understand the benefits and then change the philosophy of how you do things. But our last quick question, Tony, is probably a bit of a segue. Where can finance professionals look for professional development opportunities in service planning? But I think the state government and QDC ran some education last year on service planning. I understand that's something they're considering again into the future. So I suppose it's just watch that space, subscribe to the state government education and QDC education email alerts, and hopefully there'll be more education to come. So because it is an emerging trend. So. All right, that's enough from us today. Thanks, Tony, for your time. And just quickly for our members, just upcoming LGFP events. Next webinar is the 27th of June. Registration will be opening shortly. Real-time payments and Pay2, so the new payments platform. Real-time payments, geez, I've been waiting a while for that one. So yeah, that will be an interesting session. So you'll see an email, members will see an email coming through for that. Finance Professionals Forum, one-person in-day event in Brisbane, Friday, 26th of July. QR code is on your screen, so please, if you haven't registered, free for LGFP members, $110 for non-members. So that will be an interesting session there. And lastly, the save your date for the conference, 19th to 22nd November in the Gold Coast. So again, put that in your calendars, and we'll be sending out more information on that. So. Right, that's enough from us. Thanks, Tony, again. Appreciate your time. Thanks, everyone, for your attendance, and see you shortly. Bye.
Bye.